Vorige keer hebben we routingmethodes behandeld en een simpel model daarvoor afgeleid.
Must be English.
It's always something. Sometimes I start with a bachelor course in English, and then I see it's relating to me. So previous week we derived two models for routing messages into a network. These were the store and forward, and we derived a simple model, approximate model of the communication time, which is equal to the startup time of the message plus the hold time of the message into the intermediate links, and L is the number of links, plus the transport time of a message consisting of n words times the number of links it has to pass. Right? This was the store and forward communication. And the other one was cut through, where the communication time through is again equal to the startup time plus also the hold time, but now the transfer time is not equal, is not multiplied by the number of links. So it's somewhat in store and forward, we move the message from one point in the network to the other to go towards the destination. While in cut through, we go to T, we first establish a route and then stream the message across the intermediate nodes towards the end destination. So what I'm going to do now is go with you through a number of basic communication operations and derive their complexity, giving a certain network structure. See if this still operates. It only operates, of course, if I connect it. Okay. So we consider rings, meshes, and hypercubes, nothing more, to make the analysis a bit simple. Links are bidirectional, so we can send from A to B, but also from B to A. But we only allow per node one message on a link at a certain time. Right? So if I have a node connecting to two other nodes, then it either communicates to this one or to that one, but never to both at the same time. That's a simplification. I will relax that later on and see what the consequences are, but for the analysis, we all do this. Right. Well, let's start with a single message transfer. Now, this should be easy because we have the formulas here. So the only thing we have to substitute for a certain network is the number of links you have to pass, right? And that's pretty straightforward because we know more or less what the maximum distance is. In a ring, it's halfway, right? Either way. So in a single message takes that amount of time. So that's n in store and forward. So the number of links you have to pass is p over 2, and in the message 2 times p over 2 times 4. We have to write this kind of things. And in a hypercube, it's max log p. So that's the upper bound of the transfer time for store and forward. For cut through, it's simple. This formula. Right, so nothing special about that. So that's a single message. And we may conclude that if m is small, the number of words, then SF is storing forward is approximately equal to cut through, but if m is large, then CT is definitely the way, the fastest way to go from A to B. So that's simple. The first more collective communication pattern is what we call one-to-all broadcast. So what is the situation? We have n nodes, n processors, and one has a message big M, and it needs to send this message M to all other processors in the system. There is also a reverse operation, and that is all-to-one reduce, right? So that everybody has an item, and this item needs to be reduced to 1. That can only be done under certain algebraic circumstances, right? That the operation is commutative and associative in this reduction phase, but it can be considered the inverse, if you wish, of this one-to-all broadcast. Okay, let's see what the complexity is. Let's stick ourselves to a ring and store it forward. Well, this is a ring, right? And let us assume this message M is residing at node 0. Simple. And of course, the first thing we do is to send it to one of the neighbors. Now, we can't send it at the same time to both, so we, for instance, select to send it to the first processor. So what do we do next? Yes?
One look forward, but 0 but also send to 7.
Yes.
At the same time.
So that can be done simultaneously because it doesn't use that link anymore. So in the second step, we can both use this one and this one, right? Because we have to send this M to all other processors. So that is step 2, and then so forward, right? 3, and then at 4 steps, we're done. Which immediately leads to a simple complexity analysis that the maximum distance we have to traverse here is P over 2. I don't know what happened here. Probably the thing fell off. But in the slides it's okay. It's something that has to do with a fault incompatibility between Apple and Microsoft. I mean, the only thing I can get rid of it by taking my laptop. Yeah.
Can I ask something, please?
Yeah.
Why in the first time we cannot send a message from 0 to 7?
You can do that. But it's
one
storing
to one,
forward,
so
right?
You have different interfaces. You can generate the message to all the interfaces you have, right?
But you can only send one message at a time to a certain link.
Yeah, but if you have if you generate a broadcast,
Yeah.
you can generate one message for all the interfaces, all the interface.
Yeah, but you may not multiplex it over the links.
Yeah, but there are different links.
If you can go, if you start here, right, you can only use one link at a time. That's the assumption I just presented to you. I'm going to relax it later on, but the basic assumption for the analysis is that we only use one link at a time. Okay? So the one-to-all broadcast is simply like that. Okay, next. What do we do with if we have a mesh? Now, here we have a mesh. What do we do? Anyone has an idea? Are you?
At one time you send on the horizontal and the other time on the vertical.
Right. Right. And that's a method we see more frequently in the analysis is that we first do just the previous method, like store and forward, but now not on the complete ring, but on one row. Of course, the number of processors is not p anymore, but the square root of p here, right? And then, after that, in the second step, we can do all store and forward. We consider this is a small ring, and this is a small ring, and this is a small ring, and then we do the store and forward this way. So then the formula becomes very simple. 2 times the single ring, and the single ring then contains the square root of p processors. So this should be the for function. Okay. So in the mesh, it's simple. So in a 3D mesh, it's relatively straightforward, but then we treat all dimensions likewise, so the third dimension also, and then we get this formula, right? And it's 3 times this expression times the 1/3, the third root, 1/3, what you call it, of p divided by 2. Please also note that we use the wraparound feature to make the analysis a little bit more simple, right? If you do not have a wraparound, it becomes slightly more not more difficult, but different. Right, then the hypercube. Store and forward. Anyone has an idea? Yeah?
Well, you could start with the square formed by 0, 1, 2, and 3, and then going the depth dimension, so to speak.
Yes, but is it fundamentally different than the algorithm we used before?
I don't think so.
So it's again, do it dimension-wise, right? The only, what you see is that the ring here is very simple, right? It only contains 2 processors. So what you do is then first use the first ring in the first dimension, which is only 2 processors. Then the second dimension, then the third dimension, and then you're done. And what you see, it's 3 steps, right, for 8 processors. So you immediately see, hey, here's a log p coming, right? Because it's going way faster than the number of processors. And indeed, in the store and forward here of a 1-to-all is proportional to log p as you might have expected. Right, so that's the 1-to-all broadcast for store and forward. Now cut through. Well, anyone has an idea how to use cut through? Yeah?
The number of processes is also the number of connections you have to establish. So it's like new steps, you have to make new links. You have to send new messages to new processes. You
Yeah.
have to establish new links.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So on a ring, you have to make one connection from peer to peer
Yeah.
at a time.
Yeah.
So steps are, you create a link at each time, from 0 to 1, from 0 to 2, from 0 to 3, from 0 to 4.
But what's the first to start with in cut through? The same? Are we first sending the first
Yeah,
message from 0 to 1, or do we do it differently? Yeah?
Well, you could start by making a link to 4,
Yeah. So from 0 cut through to 4. Yeah.
and then from there you disseminate to 2 and 6, and then from there to 5 and
Right.
3, and then
Right.
1 and 7.
So you say you probe to the half of the ring, and then you divide it up again, and then in a divide and conquer way. And that's indeed what you should do, right? So you first send it halfway, then you divide both halves again in two and do the second step, right? And then you're done, right? Now the derivation of the formula is somewhat more complicated because suppose we have a ring to make our analysis a little bit easier, which is a power of 2, right? Which is the case in our previous example. Then we have several steps, right? First step is from the 0 to half of the ring, and then from both halves to again shrinking halves, right? And then you half it again and towards the last step. So all these communication times, with the appropriate L filled in, needs to be summed up. So what we get is this formula. Right? If you do it right, you see that we have a summation, and it's log p step as you would think, because it's continually halving your space. And in the end, this one becomes more complicated, the L, because it's halving again, so you have to come up with the appropriate formula. But this one is pretty simple, because in the end, if you take the individual term, then the communication time is proportional to log p in this case. The whole time proportional to p, but that's for large type of messages, that's a small fraction, so you can often ignore that one. So, what we can conclude is for this one-to-all broadcast is that if we compare store and forward against cut through, the function, the ratio between the two, if we ignore the startup time and hold time, is proportional to p divided by log p, right? That means that if we assume that the message size is lower bounded by p log p, then the store and forward is equal to p squared divided by p log p, and the cut-through time is proportional to p. Yeah.
Why is the much larger sign there for M and TS and TH?
Because they can only be ignored if the number of words you transfer in a single message is large. Because otherwise they're kind of constant factors, right, in the whole game.
So basically it's saying M is much larger than TS and TH, but TS and TH are also going to 0.
Then we assume, that we can ignore these effects, right? They're not really going to 0, right? But then in the analysis we assume that we just scrap them away.
Okay.
And this assumption is also something we kind of later on see more frequently, and that's just to make the analysis easier. So we just assume that the message size is lower bounded by p log p, so then we can replace the m in the equation, in this equation, to p log p, right? And then you get the expression like that. Right. So here you see that for one-to-all broadcast, this one is more profitable, the cut-through algorithm. Definitely for the ring. Well, the other one, and I only do the all-to-one reduction, is fairly simple, right? Then you just start the other way around. So you start by reducing on 4, you select half half of the processors, and they send their reduced value to their neighbors, right? That means that their data item is reduced to a single data item. That can only be done for a plus and multiplied type of operations, right? Where the operation is associative and quantitative. And then we go on, right? To reduce it again, and then finally we go back to the original one with the same complexity. Because otherwise we can't reduce, then the message size will grow, right? Every time we have to append two messages together, and we get a different expression. But if we do a reduction, then this can be done. Right. Well, where do we get these reductions, one-to-all broadcast and one-to-all reduction? Well, simply with matrix vector multiplication. So here we have a matrix A and a vector X, and they're multiplied, and the result is in the result vector Y. Now, if I would do that in a parallel way, I could do it like this, right? I now have the matrix here, A here, the vector here, X is here, right? So every element of the vector needs to be multiplied by the element of a row of the matrix, and then the whole partial products have to be summed and is equal to the result of I, and I have to do that for all rows in the matrix. Right? That's basically the algorithm for matrix vector multiply. Now the most simple example I can do is, for instance, partition up the data space of the vector and the result vector and the matrix A to assign the elements this way, right? You can do it in a different way, but also in this way. This is a bit silly, of course, because this is already here, but it's easy to see how you can generalize it to a larger partitioning, right? So that you have a matrix here, and you can put partitions in a larger grid. So essentially what you do is send them P0 and P1 in a one-to-all broadcast across the columns here. Now this is silly, of course, because you don't do that, because it's already there, but you get the idea, right? And then in the second phase, you have an all-to-one reduce into the resulting Y factor. So here you see a typical application of this one-to-all broadcast and one-to-all reduce communication pattern in a practical sense. So it's an often recurring pattern in many computations. One-to-all broadcast, one-to-all reduce. Right? That's the bottom message I want to give to you. Okay, next step. One-to-all broadcast with cut-through routing on the mesh. Well, of course that's the same as in the other cases, right? Do it dimension-wise. So first do the cut-through on a ring, and then do the cut-through on the columns, and you kind of sum it up, these two phases, and then you get this expression, where we make use of the fact that the 2 log of the square root of p is equal to the log. So cut through on a mesh is also of complexity log p in terms of the messages, the MTW, because that's usually the most important term we're looking at. The same holds for cut through on a hypercube, but here again we are see that we do the CT cut through ring dimension wise, But there are only 2 processes per dimension. So what would be the conclusion there? Because it's like sending an item you already have, right? If you compare it to store and forward, yeah?
I don't think the complexity is that much between the two.
No, it's exactly the same. Because if you only have 2 processors in a dimension, you basically do store and forward, right? Because there's nothing in between. So there's no difference. So here you see already a case where store and forward and cut through fall together, or are equivalent, right? There is no difference. And that's why I treat the both to see you that at first sight, as I said to you before, cut through is way better, but you see in practical situations like this, it doesn't matter, right? It's all equal. Okay, now next to the next category, that's all-to-all broadcast. Now, what does that mean? That means that we have again n processors, each having a different data item, and we want all these data items to be replicated among all the other processors, right? So that everybody has the same data set in the end. So first the data set is distributed over all processors, and after the all-to-all broadcast, everybody has a copy of the whole thing. And of course, the other way around is the all-to-one reduction. And that also is a meaningful operation we see later on. This must be not all-to-one, must be all-to-all reduction. I see. So let's start with store and forward. Now, question to you. What would be your first shot if we have to do this kind of operation? So again, go back. Every processor has a data item which needs to go to all the other processors.
Can you send more than one data item in a single cycle?
Uh,
Transmission?
You can only, yeah, you can certainly send more than one across the link, because then the message size becomes larger. Yeah?
Then every processor would just send in one direction at the same time, right?
Yeah, that is possible. You propose to do that.
Yes, although now I'm starting to hesitate.
And then how many steps would you need?
B.
Right. I think you're right. Because basically what you do is at the same time everybody sends at the same time its result to its neighbor, right? But what he possesses needs to be also known to all the other processors, right? So we just basically shift the whole thing around in an equal number of steps, -1, than the number of processors. And then we're done. So the messages, as we say, are pipelined, right, across the system, and the time complexity is proportional to P. Right? It's a very simple store and forward model to get the data across. Got through. We would love to do it like this. happens here is that this violates our initial assumption that there cannot be more than one message at a time in transfer. Right? So we have a problem of contention over these links, meaning that this doesn't work. Again, an example where cut through cannot be applied, and it's not faster than store and forward. Not even faster. You can't do it that way. So you have to do it store and forward to have a good solution for this. Well, in the end, you would wonder if I'm going to scrap away all these advantages of cut through if something remains, right? Of course, it always remains there when you have a single message transfer. That's no debate. Then cut through is way faster. Right. So all-to-all broadcast on 2D wraparound mesh. That's again simple, right? Because there you could do all the rows together instead of one-to-all. You do it all together with the message size n, right? And everybody got it. And then
Same thing in the other dimension.
yeah, but is the message size still the same? No, because we have to channel all the data elements of a row through the column, right?
So it would be m times square root of b.
M times the square root of p larger, the message time. Yes, exactly. So each node makes the message size then m times the square root of p, and then we do the column in the seconds. Right? And we sum the two communication times, and then we're done. So this is the row, this is the column, and this is the, and we sum them up, right? And then we see also in the mesh that the time is proportional to p, which you kind of expect, right? That in the mesh you don't have different results than for the ring type of communication pattern. Right. Hypercube's the same, but now for log p dimensions. So yeah, I won't go into the details of that, but again, it's proportional to p. So here you see that although the startup time may differ if you use a ring or a mesh or a hypercube, in terms of an all-to-all, the communication complexity is in the order of p for all algorithms. And so you don't have a real advantage here of using a hypercube over a mesh or something. They're all proportional. All the previous holds for the all-to-all reduction, but there's a difference if we can reduce here at the intermediate nodes, because then we don't have this m times square root of p expansion or reduction of the message size. So if we could reduce it, then the communication time is not equal to p, not proportional to p, but to only log p. Right? There's even a more interesting case where the message size is 1, namely 1 bit, for instance. Then we see that the expression reduces to log p. And this happens with what we call a barrier operation. Now, who can explain me what it is? Yes?
Well, when you have multiple processors that might not
then you need to do this. Yes. So this is typically the case where all processes work independently and then have to synchronize before they can all continue. Then they have to know from each other whether they're all finished. And you can only do that after this all-to-all communication pattern, because everybody needs to communicate with everybody else that they are done. Right? Just basically communicating a bit, I'm done. But they all need to know. And that's all-to-all, equivalent to all-to-all communication, broadcast, or all-to-all reduction in this case. And has a complexity of log P in that sense, because we can reduce in the intermediate phases and the message size is only 1. So that's a bit of a log that we're not confronted with this proportionality in P, because if an all-to-all reduction would be proportional to P, then scaling and this really a barrier operation is a very frequently occurring operation in parallel system, would be prohibitively expensive, because you have say 1 million processors trying to do an all-to-all reduction operation to do a barrier operation which is proportional to P, then it becomes more and more expensive. So that's what we don't like. But here you see in the analysis that it's not as bad as it initially looked. So what about CT in all to all broadcast? Come through. Anyone making a guess? Would this help us in speeding things up? You say no. You nod no. No, you're right. It's the same as store and forward, because you cannot use this kind of mechanism to speed up the operation. Next operation, scatter and gather. Also frequently occurring in many operations. One processor has n data items, and it needs to scatter these data items across the n processors. Right? The other operation is gather. Everybody has a piece of the cake, and I want to send all pieces to a single processor. Right? This frequently occurs. Well, can you tell me where this would occur? Yes.
Big servers.
Big?
Big servers like Facebook and stuff that you have to combine.
Yeah, that you have to collect things. Yeah.
Especially with big data.
Yeah. Also in simple things like starting a parallel operation, right? If you start computing, you start usually with one processor, right? And then it has some data which it needs to be processed on in parallel, right? So the first step is to scatter the data over the processors, and then later on, when all the results have been achieved, gather the data to the single processor, right? So it's an important operation. So it's got through a store and forward essentially here also not that different, and we just treat the hypercube only here. So what's happening is that one processor has all the data, right? And it first sends the data to but one to the other processors, right? Sorry, it sends half of its data to the other side of the cube. So that at the end of the first step, it has data items 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, 7 are cross. Then the next step we half again, getting this picture, and then we half again, and then everybody has the whole thing. And you see that this is proportional to P, right? Because there are P steps involved to get everybody serviced at this point. Initially, you would think it's log P, right? Because there are log P steps. Now, what's causing the fact that it's P? So go back 1, and then we double the number of messages, 2, 4, and then we're done, right? So it's 1, 2, 4, so that's log P, right? But still, the message, the communication time is proportional to P.
It can send all the messages in one step.
Well, you can.
The message size is larger.
Yeah, the message size is large. So you start with 4, and then you kind of in the opposite direction diminish the number of data items, which causes the fact that it counters the log P complexity towards being proportional to P. So if you have these things a bit in your mind, right, you can automatically already kind of derive quite hard the order complexity of not very precise, but if you would say give me the order complexity of this operation, you could say, well, it's order P or it's order log P or something like that. By looking at how the communication pattern in the number of steps behaves, but also whether the message sizes shrink or expand in a certain phase. So when you have both log P steps and also a log in the size of the messages, you end up with the proportionality of P in here. And that also holds for a ring and a mesh. Right. And that makes up exactly the time for a break. See you next time.